Chapter 42, Chapter 39, The Infinite Abyss. Chapter 39, The Infinite Abyss. More. We need more power. God needs more power. Give yourself to our God. Pray to God. Praise God. Sacrifice your body and soul to God. You are destined to become God's power. Ryu whispered the words as he waited in the cave, silent and sleeping, as he had been ever since unleashing the plague upon Gate. His body was different from those of even his own kindred, in that food and water were merely indulgences rather than necessities. Had it been required of him by his God, he would have been able to sleep another 10 years on end, watching and waiting. Fortunately, that would not be the case. Soon, all too soon, the destined child would make his decision, and then Ryu would be able to turn to the final duty remaining before his final reward. In a strange sort of way, Ryu almost anticipated that reward which would be his in the end, the only reward his God ever granted. His life had been so long, longer even than the eldest gods in their incarnations upon this world, that death seemed welcome, as long as it came in a way that was appropriate for one such as him. Now that his oldest and closest friend had gone ahead of him into the void beyond life, only the resolution of his conflict with the destined child was more anticipated by him than the promise of the final fate which, alone, still quantified him as mortal. His right arm had healed from the taste of God's displeasure he had received months ago, months that seemed like minutes to him in his slumber. Stirring slightly in his sleep, Ryu flexed the claws of that massive limb to be sure, and was pleased when there was no sting of pain, however minor. Tail twitching idly as it wrapped around him, he refocused his attention on the slumber of the destined child, upon the roof of the home he had created for himself, among the family he had made in similar fashion. More. We need more power. God needs more power. Give yourself to our God. Pray to God. Praise God. Sacrifice your body and soul to God. You are destined to become God's power. Laden. Ryu swore, jerking upright, pale and trembling, his clothes soaked with sweat. It took him a moment to remember where he really was, and that he had dozed off in the middle of the afternoon there, atop the roof of his home. The sun was just starting to set now, and night was close enough that he could already tell that his outdoor nap had been a mistake without dressing warmer, considering the freak snowfall that was still recurring every morning. Shivering, he went back inside, making a note to get hammered that night. It was likely the only way he'd be able to sleep at all.
There ya are,
Nero greeted him as he walked into the meeting room.
Was wonderin' when ya were gonna come on down. Everybody else is out, 'cept for Dee's. Pretty sure she's nappin' upstairs. She does tend to do that a lot,
Ryu commented, smiling slightly as he recalled all the stories he had heard about her time impersonating a teenage student at the Orion Magic School, when she had roomed with Nina.
She'll wake up for dinner. Everybody else, then? I figured some of them would, but I didn't think they'd all be out. Seems like everybody's got people to see,
the old man explained.
Had to help out a couple of them get in there. Good thing I've been practicing my magic. You know warp?
Ryu blinked, surprised and impressed.
You never said so. Didn't seem important, till everybody wanted to head out to different places all at once.
Nero shrugged.
Never had much talent for black magic or white, but I ain't bad at the miscellaneous stuff. Hey, you're probably better than me.
Ryu shook his head.
Inherited skills notwithstanding, I always figured I was the second worst of the group, but these days you could make a case for even Cat passing me up.
Sitting down in his usual seat, he leaned back, staring at the ceiling.
Alright, let me take some guesses here. A couple are pretty obvious. Bao, for example. Doesn't take a genius to know where he's gone off to. Visitin' Sylvia, and catchin' her up on everything she's missed,
Nero agreed with a chuckle.
Bet that conversation's gonna be plenty interestin', but I can't really say I envy him it. Sylvia's a good girl, but sometimes when she gets angry.
He left it hanging.
Bao can take it,
Ryu told him.
They've only technically been dating for most of the year, but everybody who knew them both could see it for a long time before then. They're a perfect match for each other, when you get right down to it. He'll be fine.
He thought for a moment.
Jean, I'm guessing, went back home to Sima Fort. 2 for 2.
Nero nodded.
Wanted to see his dad and sister. Probably some old friends, too. Salvatore went with him. Not really surprising,
Ryu said, smiling slightly.
Spar's not hard to guess either. There's only one place or person he'd really want to go back to. Gandaroof.
Nero's eyes turned distant for a moment.
You know, I never really thought about this before, but I never actually met him. Or her, or whatever. Like the rest of you. Think I could, sometime, after all this is over. Assuming we're all still alive.
Ryu replied, with a smirk to show that he was kidding, although he wasn't sure if he really was.
I don't see why not. Is there a particular reason for this interest, or just idle curiosity? It's kinda hard to explain.
Nero shrugged.
Meet in a wise tree, a fella who fought in the first Dragon War, and who's still alive to talk about it. That's something to remember, you know? Makes how old I am seem like nothing. You fellas have done a lot o' stuff like that, and I wasn't there for most o' it. I'd kinda like to see a few o' the things everybody else has. Anyways, you got 3 for 3, so far. Wanna keep on going, see how far you can take it. Might as well,
Ryu agreed, picking up on the change of subject and not questioning it.
Let's see here. Nina. I'm guessing she's out with Mina.
For many reasons, he was fairly certain that she wouldn't be feeling up to returning to India just yet, although he didn't vocalize that thought.
Bingo.
Nero nodded.
Said they'd be flying out in the area if I needed 'em for something, as if I'd bother 'em even if the world started ending ahead o' schedule. I know, and so does Nina, but she says things like that anyways,
Ryu explained. After another moment's thought, he shrugged.
That's about all I've got, though. I doubt that Rand would want to head back to Farmtown, and I know Sten wouldn't go anywhere near Highland just yet. I have absolutely no idea when it comes to Cat. Well, you're wrong about Rand.
Nero's smile faded.
It was hit in him, bad, but he said he wanted to go and settle things over there. Tell folks what happened to his mom, make sure they're doing what she'd want with her land, that sort o' thing. Wow.
Ryu shook his head slowly.
You know, he doesn't really think of himself this way. At all. But sometimes. I think Rand's actually the strongest one on this team, and I don't mean physically. His ma raised him better and she knew, with that,
Nero replied sadly, his bushy eyebrows drooping.
Sten, now, he's one o' the ones I'm wondering about. Said that he had to talk to Elle for a bit. Elle.
Ryu blinked, then frowned.
He was acting kind of weird around him the other day, and I never did figure out why.
After a moment, he shook his head.
Whatever it is, it's not really any of our business unless he says it is, which he probably won't, so. I take it the other one you're wondering about is Cat. Yep,
Nero grunted.
All she said was that she was going out for a bit, and that she'd be back sometime tonight. Didn't even ask anybody for a warp. Cat's like that sometimes,
Ryu said quietly.
We've all found our place here, a place that a lot of us have been looking for our whole lives, including her. But at the same time, out of all of us, she's the one who's hanging on to a little of her old way of life, even now. Part of her is probably always going to be astray, no matter how long she lives here. Yeah, that sounds like her,
Nero agreed.
Don't that worry you sometimes, a little bit? No, I do. It's one of the only things about her that still bothers me.
Ryu admitted.
But not right now. It's more like she's the one who I still worry about, down the line. Whenever it'll be that we split up. Oh, come on, son.
Nero scoffed.
Now you're just talking stupid. Like anybody on this cruise going anywhere? Why do you think I want to teach Sylvia the ropes o' my job, so she can take over once I finally kick the bucket? Not that I plan on doing that anytime soon myself. You had better not,
Ryu joked, before shaking his head.
I'm not talking about right away. I damn well hope we stay together for years, maybe even a decade. But eventually, some of us do have something else to go back to.
He stared at the ceiling again.
Jean will have to ascend the throne, eventually. So will Nina, although lot unwilling, both of their fathers will hang on just as long as we're counting on you two. From what I've heard about M.
Nero nodded slowly.
They're both stubborn old coots, just like me, Xeon poisoning aside, and word through the grapevines that that's getting better. I can see your point, though. House always wins in the end, on that score, and when it does.
He trailed off, falling silent for a moment before speaking again.
What about D's? That is one can of worms I'm not going to open,
Ryu told him fervently.
I've got some ideas, but actually talking about it? She'd know, somehow. And when she got her hands on us. Right,
Nero agreed hastily.
That one's up to her. Private business, sort o' thing. But once Nina and Jean have to go back home. It won't be the same, without everybody here,
Ryu told him quietly.
I'm not just hoping we'll have as much time as possible for all of the obvious reasons. Sten's going to need as much as he can get, before he's ready to go back. In the end, though. He's got unfinished business, even after last time, and he knows it. If the group starts splitting up, that's when he'll finally get up the nerve to face it. Rand'll probably end up doing the same thing,
Nero guessed, scratching his beard.
Those two don't have nothing in common, but that don't stop them from being similar in some ways. I can't decide if that makes sense or not,
Ryu said dryly after thinking about it for a moment.
You're probably right, though. Bao'll be okay, chances are, he'll end up being your successor, as mayor of township. Even though Sylvia will probably be the one who's actually running the place. I guess what I'm saying is that they'll do twice as good a job at it together as either one of them would separately. Yeah,
Nero replied, smiling again.
Spar'll probably be fine, too. It'll just go back to whatever it was doing before joining up, except for visiting everybody, every now and then.
He lost his smile.
That just leaves you and Kat, and I see why you're sorta worried about her. What about you, then? That depends.
Ryu sighed, closing his eyes.
On what I end up deciding.
He didn't feel the need to state exactly what he needed to decide, once they were finished with the destiny bullshit.
Even you still don't really know, hey?
Nero said, raising an eyebrow.
Split right down the middle? 50-50. Yeah,
Ryu admitted, sighing heavily.
I think really. I'm kind of afraid of trying to decide. I'll do it when I have to, when I agreed to, but until then. I don't want to while anything else except for that is messing with my head. I want to be able to think about that, and nothing else, and I can't do that just yet. Once I can.
He let it hang before turning his head to glance at Nero.
This is probably a long shot, but I don't suppose you would have any advice for me, on that score. My advice.
Nero met his eyes.
If you really do care about both of them, just as much, and you always will no matter how you decide, then I'd think about their angle more and your own. What I figure's most important, what it really ought to come down to, is who needs you more. If one of them's gonna go her own way, and you'll be spending the rest o' your life with the other. Who needs me more?
Ryu repeated quietly, thinking back on both girls, and on everything he knew about them, and worried about without ever saying a word on the subject to either one. About Kat's occasional violent tendencies and vagabond inclinations, and Nina's emotional fragility and psychological vulnerability. Both were strong women, in entirely different ways, some of the strongest he had ever met, but both had their weaknesses as well.
I never thought about that, but... You're right. I'll have to remember that.
More. We still need more power. God needs more power. Give yourselves to our God. Pray to God. Praise God. Sacrifice your bodies and souls to God. You are destined to become God's power.
Right now, though, dinner should be ready soon,
he continued, standing up.
And even if it isn't, I can still get started on a mug while I wait for everybody else to join the party. Coming along. I could use a pint or two myself,
Nero agreed, pulling himself to his feet as well.
Let me just get my coat. Never thought I'd say this, considering where this place used to be, but I ought to get a coat rack or something near the door. Might be a good idea,
Ryu agreed, heading towards the stairs.
I'll go grab my own.
As it turned out, Dees descended as he was leaving his room, and the three of them all headed over together, where Mrs. Ribob informed them that the barbecued turkey she was making for dinner would still need more time before it was ready. Undeterred, they went over to the Haseko's pub, and started drinking there as they waited for the rest of the group to join them. It wasn't long before, one by one, they started to trickle in. Kat was the first one to return, looking as cheerful and nonchalant as ever, and immediately started catching up on the drinking as if it were just another day. Spar was next, calm and unemotional, followed by Jean, who was actually slightly subdued, although in his case that only meant that he was on par with the other optimists in the group. All three seemed determined to ignore whatever they had been thinking about that day, and Ryu wasn't going to argue with that decision. Unfortunately, Sten wasn't quite as convincing when he joined them. His air of joviality was more forced than usual, and everybody could see how tense he was underneath, though nobody brought it up. Rand, on the other hand, didn't even try to pretend otherwise when he slouched in, silent and morose. Fortunately, seeing everybody else making a deliberate effort to enjoy themselves despite circumstances seemed to reach him, and eventually he joined in, though there was a notable tinge of desperation to it. Nina seemed of a similar mindset, gloomy and quiet at first. She started to relax after her first couple glasses of wine, and was soon in as good of a mood as she ever was, her smiles and laughter sometimes even seeming to be genuine. The high point of the evening, however, came when Bao finally joined them, and Sylvia with him. As soon as she walked in, Dees fell silent. The two of them had been friends during her time undercover in hometown, and unlike the team, Sylvia had never forgiven the sorceress for deceiving her as to her true nature. It seemed that had changed, though, tentatively, almost uncertainly, Sylvia began talking with her as she had back in those days. Dees responded in the same manner, and soon they were both apologizing as they embraced, and everybody else cheered. It was a good evening, the best that any of them had had in a long time, either individually or as a whole. The merriment spread quickly to the rest of the town, and by midnight the entire flying town was alive with music, dancing, and of course alcohol. An hour or two later, as it was winding down, Ryu finally felt ready to try sleeping again, and went upstairs to collapse into his bed. Power. We need your power. God needs your power. Give yourself to our God. Pray to God. Praise God. Sacrifice your bodies and souls to God. You are destined to become God's power. Despite his uneasy slumber, he only had a slight hangover in the morning, one that was easily remedied. Everybody else seemed to be in a similar state, and once they'd all recovered and grabbed some breakfast, they convened around the meeting table.
All right,
Ryu said quietly, leaning forward with his elbows on the table and his hands clasped.
Who wants to go first?
For a few moments, nobody spoke, until Bao cleared his throat.
This is the way I see it,
he said, quiet and calm.
And I'll admit, my angle might not be the same as the rest of yours, so I'll understand if that's the case. But the thing is, Laud and willing, I'll be getting married soon. One of these days, I might even have kids. And when we do, and they have kids, and they have kids.
He shook his head angrily.
Then if we let this go, then when the day does come that Evans breaks out, my descendants will be some of the ones who pay for it. And I'll be damned if I let that happen. I operate from a similar standpoint,
Spar said, nodding slightly.
In my case, however, in addition to my own possible descendants, I face the probability of Evan's ascension occurring during my own lifetime. Long after most of you have passed on, I will remain, and while of course I would still oppose him, to say that I doubt my chances against a god fighting alone would be a phenomenal understatement. With all of you by my side, however.
It bowed its head, smiling slightly.
Well, it is still highly illogical. But I have learned that on occasion, that is the most logical thing of all. I recall, many months ago, when all of us faced this decision once before,
Jean murmured.
In a much happier time and place, when we were still unsure of just how much we believed. There were many different reasons for what we all decided, all of them good. My own was, perhaps, the most simple, the least intellectual. But it is a decision I still stand by. Mon amis. I believe in you. I believe in myself. I believe in our united strength, a strength that cannot be matched by any power in this world or another. I believe that we can win. Are you kidding?
Kat snorted.
Sounds pretty insightful to me. Hell, all three of you are making me feel pretty crude about my say in the matter.
Her eyes glinted as she leaned forward, like Ryu.
When you get down to it, I'm a simple kind of girl. And from my perspective, all I need to know is that Evans is the one responsible for all the shit we've been through. Even Habaruko was just working for him. Which makes the decision pretty easy, for me. I say we hunt the bastard down, and feed him his own guts, and that's all I've got to say on the matter. Once more, despite the many differences between us, we find ourselves of a common mind,
Nina agreed, soft voice belying her cold eyes.
Vengeance is an unattractive emotion, I am aware, and yet I find myself quite unable to forgive and forget over something of this magnitude. More importantly, though, I don't want to live the rest of my life constantly worrying about the day when Evans will come for us.
Her deep green eyes hardened, in a way they seldom had before.
I've lived in fear my entire life until now. I'm done with that. I'm done with living in fear. Heh.
Sten shook his head slowly.
Trust me, girls. You're saints, compared to me. I've been trying, though. Trying to be a better person. Because being with you guys made me want to be one. To try and forget who I used to be.
He folded his arms.
But maybe that wasn't the right answer, either. Maybe I should still look at some things the way I would have, back then. Things like this. Evans is a known threat. The greatest one we'll ever see. One that won't accept surrender, negotiation, or compromise. There's only one way to deal with that kind of situation. Take him out. Me, I never could think like that,
Rand admitted.
I'm a simple kind of man. Always have been. Thinking of myself as a legendary hero, as a god slayer. That just doesn't work. I can't see myself like that. Even now, with what, 5 demon lords on our track record.
He inclined his head forward.
But I can see you guys like that, now. And maybe, if for some damn reason you think I could do it. Well, hell. Bet that'd make my mom proud, wherever she is now. Saving the world. Be kind of nice to finally be able to do something even she'd have to give me credit for. You all know my stake in this,
Dee said calmly.
I'm the easy one. I kind of have to vote yes. So I guess if I want to say anything that's meaningful at all, I have to make this about you guys. About who you are, not who destiny wants to make you into.
She took a deep breath.
About being one of you, and having a stake in this that's just as personal as all of yours are. But you know what? Screw it. I don't know if this will really mean anything to you, but this isn't just business for me. It is personal, and it always was. Because it's family. He's your nephew, isn't he?
Ryu guessed.
Evans. Yeah.
She nodded slowly.
You've all figured it out by now, one way or another, after what Habaruka said. He's my nephew. Because Miria was my twin sister. And Laden is our father.
She raised her head, eyes a mystery.
Which makes him my responsibility to take care of. Because I played by the rules, like my father always did, and went back to sleep after killing my sister, instead of tearing down there into infinity. Maybe if I had taken him from Habaruka and Baruberi, and raised him myself, he'd have turned out differently. But I didn't, and he didn't. And here we are. I guess that just leaves me,
Ryu said after another long moment of silence.
And I'm glad we're all in agreement this time. Because turning back, and walking away, isn't an option anymore. Not like it was back then. If it even was, back then. I'm with all of you. Everything all of you said. It's all part of why I want to go down there. All of your reasons, and one more.
He stood up, and they all did as well.
We're not going to let anybody give us back the lives we never had. That's not the way we work. We're going down there, and we're going to take our lives back. Well, then,
Nero said calmly, as everybody else stood as well.
Now that that's settled, why don't we all go on out? The townspeople re-waitin'. You,
Ryu said, then stopped, blinked, and spoke again.
You told them? But that means you had to. You knew we'd decide this way. I know you fellas,
the old man told him bluntly.
And I know how you think. Now come on, let's get out there.
Without waiting for a response, he turned and clumped towards the door, and everybody followed him. As he had said, the people of township were gathered outside, waiting for them. They remained quiet as the dragonkin filed out and stood there, silent as well.
Speech.
Watts eventually started hollering, prompting snickers from the crowd.
All right,
Ryu shouted back.
You all know what we're going to be doing, so I won't waste time on that. The bad news is, once we get far enough down there, chances are there'll be a lot of demons who sneak around us and come on out here to start trouble, a lot more than there already are. Those of you who can fight, stay here. Protect this town, and gate, too. The rest of you, have Nero and Burrows warp you to the world's capital cities, as emissaries to their leaders. It'll be up to you to tell them what's going on, and what to do. And did you want to tell us how to wipe our own asses next?
McLean shouted back.
You just do your job, Battison, and leave ours to us. We've been fighting since before you were alive. Any demon shows his face around here gets an axe right between the eyes.
Azusa yelled. It was the first time Ryu had ever seen him actually agreeing with his brother on anything.
We're not here for you to tell us what to do. We're here to send you off. What they mean to say is that we have some presents for you,
Mrs. Ribob explained.
Meat, fish, and fruit, all enchanted to stay fresh. They've both been out bringing them in, and I've been helping prepare them, with Mrs. Haseko's help.
She paused.
Oh, and our husbands, I suppose. Come on, Mrs. H, don't go saying how hard they worked.
Lacquer protested, smirking.
You'll embarrass them. Here you go,
his Uncle Eason grunted, tossing him over to the other two carpenters.
Thanks,
Mr. Revolve shot back, catching him.
That's not all you're getting, either,
Hans said, more calmly, as he began tossing packages to them, each wrapped in cloth.
Kay's been helping me put these together. You all have clean medical records, aside from your pre-existing injuries,
Kay added, smiling slightly, though it didn't quite reach her eyes.
I don't want to hear that any of you went and ruined that beyond what's reasonable for you. Water of life,
Bao noted, opening his and examining the small water skin inside.
And properly enchanted so it doesn't lose its potency, either. Normally when it's stored, all it cures is zombification, but this stuff should be good for just about anything. And these are crushed and steamed herbs,
Spar murmured, glancing at a small green sphere.
Taken orally, they will boost one's healing process phenomenally. As well.
It blinked as it examined another sphere, similarly sized but white instead of green.
Wise fruit. Only concentrated.
Hans nodded, smiling.
5 times the kick, no poisonous side effects. I didn't even know that was possible,
Nina murmured.
That's the problem with magicians these days.
Burrow snorted.
They go around teaching kids like you what the limits of the possible are. Still, you lot have potential, or at least as much as anybody does. I've taught you my best tricks. The rest is up to you. Don't go blowing it. And now, comes the fun part.
Leamington boomed, opening up a large crate that had been stacked innocuously next to Watt's house.
Come on, all of you, help me get all this handed out. Start with the boss.
A suit of mixed plate and chainmail was brought out, enameled in white and gold, with the sign of Laden on the chest.
What do you think? Fit for a hero. You guys made this for me?
Ryu asked, blinking.
We made some for all of you.
Beretta shot back.
Unfortunately, we know we won't be able to top that sword of yours, so you won't be getting one of those. The rest of you are a different story.
Next out of the crate was a rather unusual suit of armor, one that looked like it had been made out of several shields of various sizes, welded together with chainmail added on. Accompanying it was a highly unusual crossbow, with a bundle of quivers built on top of it, which seemed to be somehow part of the device itself.
You're kidding me,
Bao muttered, looking stunned, as Ryu began shucking off his old armor to put on the new. As always, they all wore their normal clothes beneath.
Is this what I think it is? Fully automatic.
Leamington nodded.
So long as it's got the ammo. It was tricky, but we found somebody who could make the damn things and had one shipped in. And speaking of which...
He tossed Kat a light blue robe that had been cut down to be less restrictive, along with a pale white battle staff.
Another one of my connections sent me some dead demon skeleton thing. Said the bones were stronger than steel. So I cobbled that together out of them. Damn.
Kat whistled, spinning it experimentally.
Awesome. Man, I spent all my life just hoping for a metal one, and now I have this? Thanks. Weapons aren't the only thing these rampaging demons are good for, either,
Beretta continued, drawing a huge white fur cloak out of the box.
This came from the mammoth demon carcass you brought back for us. Its hair seems to be equally strong. I know it's a bit unorthodox, but I think you'll find it suitable. And for weaponry, we managed to find a seller for these in Highland.
She added on a pair of heavy steel spiked knuckle guards, clearly made for ridiculously large hands.
Hey, I have a hard enough time finding any armor that'll work for me at all,
Rand told them, smiling as he picked both up.
Oof. Heavy, though. Yeah, I see why you chose this for me. Thanks. So what do I get?
Sten asked impishly.
If it's good enough, I might even forget that I heard somebody back home selling off surplus. See for yourself.
Leamington held up a strange black garment that looked like it would cover everything from ankles to wrists to neck, then shook it, making it clink.
Layered chain and lightweight plate, enchanted to take the weight off even more. And then there's these.
He tossed a pair of white knives.
The same as Kat's, except in this case the suckers were actually bearing them. Made out of their own bones. Figured you wouldn't care how damn creepy that was. Yours is here, Nina,
Beretta continued, holding up an identical robe to Kat's, along with a focusing ring that looked to be made of solid amber.
I carved this personally. I hope it works well. It's perfect, Beretta,
Nina assured her, taking both fondly.
I must confess some curiosity about the garment, though, in that me and Cat both have one. Did you make them yourself? Not exactly.
Beretta looked a little embarrassed.
We had them shipped here from the Isle of Medusa in the South Seas. The natives there sell them, although traditionally, those robes are worn for women who need the protection. For, mothers, or those who soon will be. Oh.
Nina blushed, and somewhat surprisingly, so did Cat.
If it's all the same, I believe I'll forget that I heard that. Same here,
Cat agreed quickly.
Moving on.
Leamington reached down into the crate once more and produced a suit of plate similar to Ryu's, but heavier, with red instead of gold and a large heart on the chest.
Prince Jean. I ain't much for fancy talk, so I'll cut to the point. From what I hear, you might just be the bravest guy I've ever met, but sometimes that costs you. So I got this enchanted, with healing magic. It's not much, but if you're hurt, it'll start doing a little. I will wear it with pride, mon ami,
the prince said gravely, bowing.
It is a gift I will treasure for all of my days. And this sword.
He picked up the jet black rapier that had been with it, and his eyes widened as he examined it.
Where did you find such a thing? The South Seas again,
Beretta explained.
From Knight Rider Isle. Some explorer somehow managed to not only land there, but slay a few and leave, with their swords. I remember that place,
Nero said, whistling.
Whoever that was had some real balls, all right. A lot of what we have for you comes from similar sources, it seems,
Beretta noted, producing a strange whip with 9 tails, 8 of them spreading from the central length like branches.
This came from yet another demon, its tail this time. Apparently they were otherwise similar to Chimerae. Thank you,
Spar said, nodding its head as it accepted both the whip and the crimson cloak that went with it.
I have been needing a new weapon, and I assume this is enchanted as well. That leaves you.
It glanced at Dees.
Oh, do I get a new weapon too?
The sorceress joked, clutching the golden cane she had wielded ever since she had joined up.
We weren't quite sure what to do on that score,
Leamington admitted, coughing.
Sort of the opposite of Ryu's. We did get this, though.
He pulled out the last thing in the crate, a full-length, straight-lined robe with wide sleeves, dark blue with a snake print.
You might recognize it, if the stories are right. Supposedly it belonged to a woman who fought in the first dragon war named No, from the land of Gust. We figured it'd be appropriate, so we patched it up. It is,
Dees murmured, no trace of humor remaining in her tone as she took the robe carefully and stared at it, her eyes a mystery.
Thank you. One more thing, then,
Mrs. Hiseko said, tossing another skin to them, this one with a stronger smell to it.
Distilled spirits. Not quite to most of your tastes, with the exception of Dees, I know, but only a couple hits will do the job. Hopefully there'll be enough to keep you all going until you make your way back to civilization. If you want to thank any of us, just make sure you come back,
her husband agreed.
We'll handle things up here,
Surfy added.
Between us, along with your reputation, I think it's safe to say we have the connections. Don't worry about us. Just focus on what's important. And come back to us,
Elle finished quietly, staring at Sten in an odd way.
We're planning on it,
Ryu told them all, as an odd, ridiculous suspicion began to take hold in his mind. Fighting the urge to look at Sten, he shook it off as none of his business before looking around to see who was missing. Aside from the Rivov's son, who they usually left at home during town meetings, there were a couple.
Where are Salvatore and Ikechi? They're with your father,
Nero explained.
Asked for a couple volunteers to take him down to see your mother, and they both chimed up. Think they might be sweet on each other, I don't know. And I don't want to know,
Ryu said quickly.
Good. That's good. That he's seeing her, I mean. I told her that he would.
Power. We need more of your power. God needs more of your power. Give yourself to God. Pray to God. Praise God. Sacrifice your bodies and souls to God. You are destined to become God's power.
That just leaves us, then,
Sana said, and everybody turned their heads to glance at the family. All 7 of them were clustered around the front door of the house. Standing together, their similarity was more uncanny than ever, with the exceptions of Solo and Granny.
Unless you actually thought we weren't coming along, but that would be pretty stupid. I'm not going to leave you to face this without me, Jean,
Siso agreed, her white eyes unusually determined.
I'm coming. We all are. Yeah, they wouldn't be that stupid,
Spoo murmured, as dazed as ever, apparently not hearing her youngest sister.
Even I'm not that stupid. I think. Thinking's overrated, sis,
Solo assured her, smiling.
What's important is doing. And what we're doing here is more important than anything else. We're not backing down now. I certainly didn't have that discussion with you and Miss Sylvia just to stay home,
Senny declared, before glancing at Shin.
Well, sis. Did you decide? Hey.
Shin blinked.
Oh. Yeah. If it's down to the Warren girl and the grass man, I'll go with the grass man, if that's okay. You smell pretty good, miss, but so does it. No worries,
Kat said quickly.
I don't play well with others a lot of the time anyways. An entirely acceptable proposal,
Spar agreed.
So long as the fusion is successful, anyways. Why don't we get down to that, then?
Sana suggested.
I'll start it up, Granny. Say what you need to before you come in and handle the rest. Just don't botch it, girl,
Granny told her sharply as her grandchildren filed inside, along with those of the dragon kin who would be fusing. At the same time, the rest of the townspeople were drifting off as well, leaving Ryu, Kat, Deez, Nero and Granny there with the statue of Loden.
I notice none of them ever tried anything with you,
Nero commented quietly to Deez.
Nope.
Deez shrugged, smiling slightly.
Funny, isn't it? Santa's learning how to perform the ceremony, now, then.
Ryu asked Granny, raising an eyebrow.
I'm guessing there's a reason for that. This is why I hate brats,
Granny replied sourly.
They always take old folks like us for granted. I'm not going to be around forever, kid, and after I'm gone one of them's going to have to take over as head of the family. I hate to admit it, but Santa's the one who's got the most on the ball. There's a reason she's the only one who stayed with me when the other 5 went off wandering. Besides, they actually listen to her, most of the time. Lady's got a point,
Kat admitted, folding her arms.
Hey, I wasn't arguing about it,
Ryu told them.
Just curious, is all. Good.
Granny slowly nodded.
Alright, kid, I don't do this sentimental crap, so I'm going to make this fast. Most of the time, fusion doesn't actually put the secondary member at any risk, the worst that can happen is that they're banished if the primary is knocked unconscious, or worse. From what I hear about this, though, it's gonna be a special case, all around the board, and there's no real way of telling for sure what's going to happen down there. Pretty much,
Deez agreed.
And yet, I notice you're not trying to talk them out of it. Like they'd listen if I did.
Granny rolled her eyes, before meeting Ryu's.
What I'm saying is, they might be a bunch of idiotic, vagrant, promiscuous strays. But they're my granddaughters. I love them. No matter how dumb they are. I'm counting on you to bring them back to me, Mr. Battison. Ryu, please, Miss Giggly.
Ryu smiled at her, for the first time since he had met her.
And I'll do that. Nobody's dying down there except anybody who's stupid enough to try and stop us. Good.
Giggly dusted her hands off, relaxing instantly.
Now then, I'd better get in there and take over. Sana can probably manage 1 or 2, but 5 in a row before her own turn's probably beyond her capabilities.
Turning away, she waited as Spar and Bao emerged before heading in.
Something going on?
Bao asked, scratching his chin. The brown in his fur had faded, leaving it completely white.
Just some formalities.
Ryu shrugged it off.
No big deal. Ah, yes.
Spar nodded, its leaves and petals had all darkened significantly, the latter turning purple and black, but it had retained its basic form, unlike previous fusions.
I suspected as much. Soon as the rest of them get out here, you'll be off, then?
Nero asked casually.
No real point in putting it off,
Ryu agreed.
Besides, if what's down there is anything like I think it will be, the sooner we get started, the better. We'll want to get as far as we can before we need to take a break to sleep.
He glanced at the statue of Loden as Rand emerged as well, slate grey from head to toe.
Which brings me to my final concern. Are there going to be ways to contact you while we're down there? Oh, yes.
Loden chuckled, but it sounded slightly forced.
There will be ways, I assure you. Hoo boy,
Rand muttered.
Then we can save the serious conversations for there and then,
Ryu decided, ignoring that.
My only question for now is it the Dragon Clan? Indeed,
Lawton replied, as Nina joined them, her wings a vibrant pink.
Both they and the Mole Clan left the world above, but for many reasons, they parted ways after that. I doubt that you will encounter them, but the Dragon Clan are a certainty. Them, and one more, who will follow you through the gate before passing you in order to lie in wait at a time and place of his choosing. Yeah, I know the guy.
Ryu nodded slowly.
We'll be ready for him, too. Him, and any others who cross our path,
Nina agreed.
Demonstrate.
Cat cracked her knuckles.
Looks like we're just about ready to go, then,
Ryu said as Jean walked out, green skin changed to teal.
As soon as Sten's done. It will only be a moment more, Mon ami,
Jean told him.
Guess so.
Dees glanced at Nero, who had been silent ever since they had started to talking with the Fusion Clan's women.
We'll be off, then. Yep.
Nero said quietly, closing his eyes for a moment.
Seems that way.
Only when Sten closed the door behind him, fur bright red, did the old man open his eyes again.
I'll keep an eye on things for you here, then. Make sure there's still a world for you to come back to, and all that. We know you will,
Ryu said gravely, aware of the awkward tone in the air but unwilling to acknowledge it verbally.
Everybody else in this town is a great guy, but you're the one who's going to have to run the whole show. We're counting on you, Nero.
He smiled, clapping a hand on his shoulder.
After all, you're one of us, right? It's okay, son.
Nero smiled sadly.
You don't have to feel sorry for me. I know I ain't, not really. S9, not 10, after all, and I'm the odd one out. You're all the ones who are gonna save the world. I'm just along for the ride. Always have been, from the start. I just...
He trailed off, then blinked, as Kat abruptly hugged him.
Shut up,
she said quietly.
Just stop. Right now. Yeah, what's that crap about, hey?
Bao said sternly.
Where'd that even come from? I'll eat my crossbow if any of us ever thought that, even for a second. As amusing as that would be to see, I don't think we'll be taking you up on that,
Sten cracked.
Seriously, though? Come on, Nero. You think we'd have made it this far without you making sure we had something to come back to? You gave us a home, Nero,
Nina murmured, hugging him as well, her eyes determined.
I know you understand just how much that means, to all of us. I haven't truly had a home since I left Windia. The magic school never felt like one. But this town, this building. It is. Because of you. You kids.
Nero whispered, eyes starting to brim over.
You're all damn fools, all of you. I'm the one who owes you so much. I was just another bum, before you found me. I didn't have anything. I had just given up. On everything. And then. You gave me all this. You taught me how to live again. Monsieur.
Jean started to say, then stopped.
No. Nero, mon ami. That is not how it works. If that is how you feel about us, then why are you surprised to find that we feel the same way about you? You are one of us. I beg you. Never, ever think otherwise again. I ain't good with emotions and feelings and all that,
Rand admitted, shaking his head.
But they're right. We need you on this team, Nero. If we didn't have this place, and you running it, it never would have worked. You're just as important as any of us. Maybe,
Nero admitted, taking a moment to compose himself. Scrubbing at his eyes with the back of his arm as the girls released him, he opened them again, blue and clear and sad.
Maybe. But the thing is, no matter how much everybody's given me, I still can't help but want more. I'd give anything, to any god, if they could just make me young again. So I could come with you. So I could be there, with you, instead of just waiting here. But I can't, 'cause I'd slow you down. Get in the way. Be a burden, and a nuisance. So all I can do is just wait here. And pray to Lawton. A legitimate concern,
Spar said, stepping forward to take the old man's hand in its own.
However, there is an answer. Trust in us, Nero. As we trust in you. We will return. No matter the odds against us, no matter how logically improbable it is, I believe this, with absolute certainty. I have found things to believe in, other than logic, because of the 9 of you. I have found friendship, with the people in this town, something I never understood before. And more than friendship. They are my friends, but you, all 9 of you. You are family, to me.
What it said, disagreed, and despite how calm her face was, something was different in her eyes, as if she had resolved some secret question that she had never spoken of but had been struggling with for some time.
I get where you're coming from, but there's one thing you were wrong about. The number's not important. Here and now, you are one of us. And if destiny didn't see you coming, I don't give a shit. When we get down there, to where the Dragon Clan live, you're going in the Hall of Heroes just like everybody else. No matter whose arm I have to break to make that happen. You kids.
Nero repeated, lowering his head.
You dem silly kids. You're too good to an old tramp like me. But since you're also dem stubborn that I know talking sense won't get through to you when you're in a mood like this. I guess I'll just have to hold you to that.
He looked from one of them to another, each in turn, blue eyes clouded with either emotion or memory. Ryu wasn't sure which.
When you come back, I'll tell you my story, too. I know I'll owe yours, Sep D's, but I never talked about mine just yet. Come back alive, and I'll change that. Then we'll hold you to that, too.
Ryu smiled, clapping a hand on his shoulder.
Take care of them for us, Nero. My father, and Mina, and Sylvia, and everybody else.
He hesitated, only a moment, before continuing.
And if Smith shows up again, watch out for her, most of all. We're counting on you, too. I'll do that,
Nero promised, smiling once more.
Alright, then. Get going, kids. Like you said before, the sooner the better, and standin' around jaywin' about our feelin's and emotions and crap ain't helpin' the world none. I'll see you when you return.
One by one, they all either shook his hand or hugged him again, before they turned and walked away. Nobody spoke, as they continued out of township and into gate, and towards the canyon behind the town. Nobody needed to, the words that needed to be said all had been, and all that was left was to continue forward, without doubts or regrets. Soon enough, under the morning sun and the falling snow, they emerged into the clearing and found Gaynor standing there alone, one hand pressed against the side of Valerie's snout.
Ikachi and Salvatore are back in town,
he said before anybody could speak.
We asked them to give us some time alone. They'll be back to pick me up in another hour or so.
Slowly, he lowered his hand and turned to face them.
Valerie told me about what happened here. I'm proud of you, son. Of all of you. You avenged our family. It was all we could do,
Ryu said quietly.
It won't change things. It won't undo everything that was done. To me, to you, to Mom, to Yua. But he'll never be able to do that to anybody else, ever again. That's something, I guess.
Looking at them together, he instantly regretted his decision to get moving as quickly as possible.
We can come back later, if you want. It's all right, Ryu,
Gaynor assured him.
Valerie and I both understand. On the contrary, this time that we had, alone together, was a greater blessing than either of us had ever hoped for. We are not so ungrateful as to demand more. Have you decided, then?
Valerie asked softly, raising her head to look at them with eyes still shut.
Ryu, my child. I do not wish to burden you further, upon everything that you have already endured, but you must decide. You are the only one who can. A decision has been made,
Ryu replied, staring up at her.
But I'm not the only one who made it. We all decided. Every one of us.
He put his hand on the hilt of the Empire.
We're going into infinity, to find Evans, and kill him. If the world will never be safe until he is dead and gone, then that's what we'll arrange.
He forced a cold smile he didn't feel.
We're good at arranging that sort of thing. Then so it shall be,
Valerie said, voice growing firm.
The world, and all of its people, shall be in your hands. If you accept that, and understand that, then so shall I.
As everybody watched, she began to shimmer, her entire body distorting like a heatwave, as she began to glow. Brighter and brighter, she became more and more indistinct, until she began to shrink, claws and wings and tail all retracting. Soon, she was the size of a human, one who was standing between them and the gate. She was beautiful, just as Ryu had remembered, her face had faded from his memories over time, but one glance brought it all back, as if she hadn't aged a day, even though she had. The time they had been apart had aged her, brought her into early middle age, but to his eyes she was just as lovely as she had been in her late 20s. Tall and pale, with long blue hair that poured down her back, she wore the same simple white dress she had preferred all the time he had known her, that, at least, hadn't changed. Her eyes were kind, an almost luminescent green, and her bat-like wings bright, shining gold.
Ryu, my son.
she whispered, as he stepped forward to embrace her.
The road you have chosen is the one of greatest peril. Your life, and your soul, and those of all your friends, stand at risk. And yet, I believe you have chosen correctly. Though it will be the most difficult thing you have ever done, or ever will, though the odds against you are nearly impossible, I believe that you will triumph. I believe in you, my son. And all of our friends. We won't let you down, Mom,
Ryu promised, head against hers, resting on her shoulder.
I promise. We'll save the Dragon Clan, and the rest of the world too. I know,
Valerie murmured.
Never forget that I know, as does your father. You are our son, Ryu. And you always will be. I love you.
Releasing him, she stepped back, as the gate behind her began to glow.
Mom.
Ryu whispered softly.
What are you doing? In order to open the gate.
Nina murmured, eyes widening.
The key to the gate is.
Kat said slowly.
The life of. No.
Jean shouted, horrified.
She's giving her life to open the gate.
Bao yelled.
Please understand,
Valerie told them, as Gaynor stepped forward, past them.
This is not a decision I make rashly. As I said, we both knew already. She told me, many years ago, on the night when she left,
her husband explained, taking her into her arms.
She told me of her duty, of why she had left her people to come into this world. Of what that meant, and of the final sacrifice she would be required to make someday. If we were to be able to protect our children, she said, I would have to accept that. And so I did, as she had accepted it when she agreed to come into this world.
His arms tightened around her, as both she and the gate grew fainter and fainter.
I love you, Valerie. Wait for me, please. One day, I'll be with you once more. I will,
Valerie promised.
I love you, Gaynor, my husband. I love you, Ryu, my son. Please. Tell Yua I love her as well. Goodbye.
And then she was gone, as were the doors into infinity. Nobody spoke. Nobody could. They stood there, heads bowed, as Gaynor slowly turned away. Without seeing him, he walked back to his son and placed a hand on his shoulder. They stood there, together, for a moment that seemed like an eternity, before he lowered it again.
I will wait, here,
he told them, sightless eyes moving from one of them to another.
Soon, Aikachi and Salvatore will return, and bring me back to gate. Until then, I believe I will take a nap, in this clearing. I never have before, but now.
Power. We need more of your power. God needs more of your power. Give your heart to God. Pray to God. Praise God. Sacrifice your heart and soul to God. You will become God's power.
Yeah,
Ryu managed to say.
Yeah, that'd be good.
He put a hand on his father's shoulder, for a moment, then pulled it back.
We'll be back. I don't know how long it'll take us, but we'll be back. I promise. I know.
Gaynor nodded.
I will wait for you, then. Until I see you return, and welcome you back, I will hold on, no matter how weak my body becomes.
They embraced, one more time, before Ryu turned to his team and inclined his head, and they followed him through the vanished gate into another world. The massive chamber behind the gate was composed of a series of green-tiled terraces, each 20 feet above the next one down and stretching both ways around the perimeter of the room, so that the next one down was smaller than the one before. With each descending level, the stairs to the next were on the opposite sides of the room, so that those who wished to go down would have to circle around the edges every time. Only the top level was empty. Every other was filled by the army of demons waiting for them. Many were familiar shapes and forms. The 12-tusked bipedal mammoths with massive fists were the most so, along with musclemen with twin heads somewhere between bear and wolf, round pillbugs on long tails whose catfish faces were deceptively cheerful, and equally spherical yet much more hideous horned reptiles whose gaping maws stretched across their entire bodies. There were even a few with the same form as the demon lord Shapukai, though much smaller, and grey instead of red. Others were unfamiliar, but no less horrifying to behold. Humanoid skeletons seemed to be a popular choice of form, as there were many of those in different roles, some with sword and shield, others riding nightmarish distortions of horses with lance in hand, and still more crouching in their hooded robes as they clutched their scythes. Haunted suits of armor hovered, a single flaming eye glowing in their helmets, and massive golems carved from crystal loomed, hands flexing. Huge, fat green cyclops hefted spiked clubs almost as large as themselves, and tiny, artificial insects built from lost technology twitched. Everybody exchanged a glance, then spread out, drawing weapons and readying magic.
Well, boys,
Cat said, bending over and beckoning with her hand as she made a face.
Who thinks they can get past us?
It took them about an hour to clear out the room, and by the time they were done, Rand and Cat were having to throw the carcasses of the slain up onto the levels they'd already passed in order to clear room to proceed. The last to fall was the apparent leader, a flaming horror with curling horns whose shoulders and upper chest simply rose from the floor as if it were water, along with clawed hands. Enough ice magic was sufficient to destroy it, however, leaving only the horns to fall to the green tiled floor like discarded trash. At the bottom and center of the room, stairs led downward, without benefit of rails. Carefully descending, his team behind him, Ryu realized as soon as he saw what came next that the first room had only been a part of the gate as well, only now were they truly entering infinity, the endless void beneath the world. They were descending onto the top of what seemed to be a mile-wide tower of black stone, with odd extensions of bridges and platforms that should have been impossible. The effect was something like a three-dimensional maze around the tower top, with edges instead of walls, before it eventually ended in another stairway, this one leading inside the tower. What was truly mind-boggling, however, was what was around the building. The roof of the infinite cavern it had been built inside stretched beyond visibility in every direction, with clusters of stalactites every so often, to both west and east. Two more staircases ended in platforms attached to them, likely the means by which the advance force of flying demons had escaped earlier. No other surface was visible, everything else, to the sides and below, simply vanished from visibility eventually. Only the tower continued to stretch down, down, out of sight, with another maze of platforms and bridges about a mile down. There were far fewer demons here than there had been in the room above. Every so often, a few would emerge from the entrance to the tower and come charging up to be slain, after which their corpses would be hurled into the void. Nobody was seriously hurt, at least not so much that sporadic treatment with white magic could not undo the damage. Another hour passed before they finally made it to the tower's entrance, and continued downward. As it turned out, each floor of the tower was another maze, built along the same lines as the first room, but with the different levels of green tiled floor much more variable. Often, they had to descend several tiers, only to climb back up and then descend once more, many times in the same room before finally reaching the next set of stairs. The number of demons continued to decrease, although there were always a few every hour, as they went further and further. They eventually decided to make camp after the first time the tower's design forced them back outside, to descend around the exterior for a mile or so before thankfully returning to the interior. Jean and Rand in particular were both particularly glad to go back in, and they located an out-of-the-way nook in which to have dinner before turning in. 3 shifts of the watch were organized, with 3 people on each, in order to dispatch any demons that discovered them. Fortunately, that only happened around half the time, just as frequently, they would pass by without noticing. They repeated that pattern the next day, and then the next after that. By the second morning the roof was out of sight as well, and they could only keep heading downward with no idea how far they had gone or how much of the tower was left to traverse. Nobody brought up the possibility of running out of food and water, but it was a question that everybody considered at least once, Ryu could tell. All the same, they kept going, without speaking or thinking of turning back. It was a grim, solemn time, and soon their usual banter started to fade. Even Sten and Jean were unable to keep the jokes up for long in the endless tower, empty of life save for themselves and the demons. Some cheer returned whenever they made camp, but even that seemed somewhat forced, born more from desire not to eat and rest in the same dark silence that they spent their days in than any real lightening of the mood. They conserved their alcohol carefully, both to avoid running out and to prevent any morning headaches. Nobody wanted to dull their edge, even slightly. It was quite possibly the most depressing week of Ryu's life, but still he kept careful track of each day. For some reason, it seemed important to know just how long it felt like they had been there, even if they had no actual way to measure how much time was really passing out of sight of the sky and with no devices to tell them. Even Spar's normally precise sense of the hour was at a loss with no plants to consult. According to the grass man, there was plant life far below them, but everything between that point and the surface was barren of even moss or mold. It was on the morning of their 8th day that Spar informed them that said source of plant life was almost upon them, or rather, that they were about to reach it. According to the grass man, it was all edible vegetation, grown inside buildings that had been apparently designed for such purposes. Though nobody spoke of what they suspected, everybody's thoughts were running along the same paths, Ryu most of all. The somber mood faded, if only slightly, and they made an effort to hurry through the next few floors as quickly as possible, an almost tangible sense of eagerness in the air. And that was how Ryu and his friends left the tower for the 10th time and entered the place of refuge that his people had built for themselves, when they had fled the world above centuries ago to prepare for his coming. Emerging from another staircase leading outside, they found themselves in a place much like the exterior floors, but built with a different mindset entirely. Rather than being a maze, the platforms were all broad and symmetrical, with bridges connecting them in places that made travel between levels as easy as possible rather than difficult. There looked to be 5 floors in all, the widest at the center and the smallest at both top and bottom, though even these were far larger than any of those seen above had been. More telling was the fact that, for the first time since they had entered infinity, there were actual buildings independent of the single, endless tower that the city had been built around. Counting quickly, Ryu estimated that there were about 100 of them, most of them individual houses, though some were clearly meant for other purposes. The most interesting, to a casual glance, were those that seemed to be built of glass, with magical lights attached to their ceilings. These were the source of the plant life Spar had senses, greenery inside almost overflowing. What was different, most of all, however, were the people. As soon as the dragonkin appeared, every man, woman and child on every floor of the city in the air beneath the earth instantly fell silent and turned to stare at them. There was no doubt as to what clan they belonged to, as each and every one of them bore one of 2 sets of defining characteristics. Either they were blonde, with violet eyes, or blue-haired with eyes of green. Aside from that, the men appeared entirely human, but every woman bore bat-like wings, in a rainbow of different colors. The silence and the stillness prevailed for several minutes, long enough that Ryu began to feel uncomfortable. His friends had spread out around them, but none of them had spoken either, and he could sense that some of them were about to. Just as he prepared to do so himself, though, one man broke the spell and began walking towards them from the 2nd floor down. He was old, balding, and bearded with a bent back, but his hair was still blue and untouched by gray or white, and his green eyes were keen. They waited, patiently, until he stood before them.
"You are the ones,"
he said, then, his voice echoing throughout the entire town despite its soft tone.
"You have come."
"Yes," Ryu replied, just as calmly, inclining his head.
"We are, and we have." "At last,"
the man said, shaking slightly, as a sigh seemed to spread through the entire community like a wave.
"At last, the time has come. We have waited long here, oh so very long, for this day."
He smiled then, slightly, and when he spoke next his voice seemed slightly more normal.
"We know your names already, and yet I believe everybody here would like to hear them from your own voice." "We'd kind of prefer that ourselves,"
Ryu agreed.
"I'm Ryu Battison, son of Gainer and Valerie. On my right are Baodogi, Sten Legacy, Randmarks and Jean. To the left, Katchan, Nina Windia, Dees, and Spar. Niromani couldn't make it, unfortunately, but he's one of us, as well."
He took a deep breath before continuing.
"I don't know all the details of what you know about us, or how you think of us, but in the world above, we're a group of professional adventurers for hire known as the Dragon Kin. It seemed an appropriate name, after I discovered my heritage." "Indeed it does,"
the old man agreed.
"Welcome, then, Dragon Kin. Welcome to the haven of your kind, Ryu, and those who he has named his family. Those who are yours, are also ours. Welcome to Dologani, the city where light and dark dragons have finally reunited after thousands of years of strife. Welcome to the home of the Dragon Clan."
He bowed his head.
"For every day of the 5 centuries since we left the world above, we have waited for this hour. Now, at last, our hopes and dreams will be fulfilled. That's what we're here for,"
Ryu said, raising his voice, and almost believed what he was saying.
"We're here to do what you've been waiting for us to do, ever since you left the world above. We're here to slay a god, like my ancestor did 1,000 years ago. We've come to deal with Evans, once and for all."
"Power. We need yet more of your power. God needs more of your power. Give your soul to God. Pray to God. Praise God. Sacrifice your heart and mind to God. You will become God's power."
"Then there are things you should know, and people who you should speak to,"
the old man said, rubbing his hands together.
"One of them is, sadly, unavailable at this time. He is very old, and his body is frail. In truth, I believe it is only the knowledge that you would soon come that has given him the will to survive this long. For now, I shall take you to the other. If you would follow me, please."
"Sure." Ryu agreed, glancing to his left and his right, and waiting until everybody had nodded before continuing.
"Can I ask who it is we're going to meet, though?" "Of course."
The old man smiled.
"I will take you to the High Priest of Loudon, who has waited longer than any, for he is the eldest of us all who live here in Dologani. I think I've got a fairly good idea as to who he is, then,
Ryu said slowly, thinking about everything he had read in the history books about the 2 dragon wars in which his ancestors had fought.
Lead the way, then. As you wish.
Turning, the old man started back the way he had come, and Ryu and his friends followed them. As they walked past, the other men and women of the dragon clan all watched in silence, still motionless. Even the smallest of children were still and quiet, their eyes shining with fascination. After only moments, Ryu found himself profoundly disturbed by their obvious reverence, to the point where he had to stop himself from saying something just to break the silence, to prompt an actual response from somebody. Thus, when they descended to the 2nd floor and he saw a pair of all too familiar faces standing by a building, hand in hand, he responded automatically without stopping to think as he normally would have.
Ray.
He blurted, eyes widening.
You're alive? But how? And Smith.
He recovered his senses just in time to stop himself from saying another name, though he still continued rambling.
What are you? How are you here? I'm sorry.
The man said after a moment, and his voice was enough for Ryu to realize that he was a stranger, despite the astonishing physical resemblance. On second glance, his hair was different as well, a pure gold rather than Ray's strawberry blonde.
Those are not our names, Ryu, but if there is any way we can be of service, please, tell us. No, I'm the one who should be apologizing,
Ryu replied, recovering. Looking at the girl as well, he noted that her wings were a deep blue rather than the black shade of Patty's.
I mistook you both for people we knew. No. Sorry. They look like us?
She asked, as everybody else around them listened. Even the old man had stopped, curious.
Then they might be dragon clansmen, especially if Smith has wings like mine. She does.
Ryu admitted.
Although her wings are black. Aside from that, she's a dead ringer for you, miss. And you, mister.
He took a deep breath before continuing.
Your hair's different, but otherwise, you look just like a friend of ours named Ray Braddock. A dark dragon. I, too, am of that family, as my betrothed is of the light dragons,
the man explained, violet eyes bright with interest in a painfully familiar way.
But how is this possible? There should be no other dragon clansmen left in the world above save for your family. It's complicated,
Ryu said, closing his eyes.
But Ray. He was a paladin of the Church of Saint Eva. A servant of Evans, who believed the lies of the demons until his final day, when he turned against them to help us instead. He gave his life to awaken the final stage of my breath of fire, so that we could save the world from the god he had been tricked into following. His name was Ray Braddock, and he was a hero. And he was our friend. Ray Braddock,
the girl repeated, slowly nodding.
The name is unfamiliar to us. But we will remember it, as will all of Dologani. The Dragon Clan will remember his name until the end of days. That we will,
a new voice agreed, from the level below. Looking over the edge, Ryu saw what he couldn't have from above, a building far larger than any other in Dologani, built of marble like most of the rest, but far more intricately decorated. The ancient man who stood in the doorway looking up at them was short and ugly, though his white robes were immaculate, the green sign of Laden upon his chest.
And when I promise to remember a name, kids, it damn well stays remembered. I take it you're the one we've come to meet with,
Nina said quietly.
The first of many,
the old man replied, smiling slightly as he touched the carved pendant of green stone he wore around his neck.
But I'm the one you need to talk to right now. I'll take it from here, Gunter.
He glanced at Ryu first, then Bao, as they descended a ramp to the 3rd level.
Been a long time since I've seen you two. 10 years, as a matter of fact. You've grown up. Thanks, I think,
Bao muttered, frowning.
10 years. You know Baruberi, then? Know him.
He snorted.
I fought the bastard, once upon a time, when I led the final assault on Obelisk. Ended up a draw, though, seeing as how we both got a little distracted before the end. Well, that tells me who you are, anyways,
Ryu said, crossing his arms.
Which begs the question of what you would prefer to be addressed as. It doesn't tell me who he is,
Kat complained quietly. Ran shushed her.
Let's go with what the last group did,
he replied.
Just be glad I'm sparing you the act. Specchio works, though hell if I know where it actually came from. Laden was the one who suggested it, for all I know, it's the name of some drinking buddy from another plane of existence entirely. That's the kind of theological question I can do without asking, thanks,
Ryu told him, shaking his head.
Alright then, Specchio. What do you have for us? To start.
Specchio raised an eyebrow.
A history lesson. I'm big on those. We'll get to what happens next after that. About the Dragon Clan,
Sten guessed shrewdly.
About what you're doing down here. Bingo,
Specchio said, rubbing his hands together.
Alright, we'll start from where Martin managed to do what I blew. After Jade, the Gold Lord, resurrected the Goddess of Lies. Martin fixed that problem by wiping her out for good, before he and his wife spent the next couple decades in Windia working towards world peace. In particular, reuniting the Light and Dark Dragon families. Even after they left, the efforts they had started continued. Their daughter eventually married a Dark Dragon Prince, binding the families through blood once more. Ah, yes,
Jean murmured.
Their romance was the basis of one of the most beautiful plays ever written, second only to Alan and Cyril. But this seems to be a wonderful state of affairs. Where, if you will pardon my bluntness, did things go wrong? When we discovered Miria's legacy,
Specchio told him, scowling.
See, she might have been insane, but she was no fool. She knew that if she broke free from her prison, Lawton would have to do what he had given her one last chance at avoiding the last time, and she knew that it might damn well work. So as soon as she was out, she snuck off to find those of her servants who had survived the first Dragon War, and left a seed of evil in their care. Baruberi, and Habaruko, and all the others. She left them her son, Evans, who was only an infant at the time. An infant god,
Nina said quietly.
Left to be raised by those two.
She shivered.
Not a pretty picture, is it?
Specchio agreed.
And they succeeded beyond their wildest dreams. Those two are as bad as it gets, but at least their actions make a certain, twisted kind of sense, however horrible it may be. Evans is another story. He has no use for logic, on the contrary, he considers logic itself to be a weakness. That's how deep his narcissism runs. He refuses to consider even the possibility of questioning his own actions, to the point where anything that runs contrary to his belief in his own purpose to end the world is repulsive to him. Sounds like a real charmer,
Kat joked, though it sounded half-hearted.
To be fair, it's not really his fault,
Specchio admitted.
Honestly speaking, he never had a chance. At first, he only fed on negative emotion. Hatred, fear, jealousy, desperation. By the time he learned to take power from other things, he was already warped beyond any possibility of correction. I don't know if he couldn't, at first, or if Habaruka kept him from doing so, but it doesn't really matter at this point. His name is Evans, and he is Death, for the Demon Lord of Death, the King of Infinity, gave up his title and his crown on the day he took him under his wing.
Power. We still need more of your power. God still needs more of your power. Give your soul to God. Pray to God. Praise God. Give your heart and mind to God. You are becoming God's power.
Baruberi,
Ryu guessed quietly.
Bingo.
The old man nodded sharply.
In time, we felt his presence as it began to spread throughout this world, as he ascended to true divinity. You see, his physical form is only an image, an incarnation through which he appears. The reality of what Evans is beyond shape or form. Only when he chooses to take a physical form can he be fought and slain, and he had no desire to do so against us. The only way to force Evans to fight, and risk defeat, was to present him with a conflict that he would choose to accept. I see,
Spar said, sharper and louder than usual, as its eyes widened.
So that is why we are the only ones who may be able to slay Evans. What is?
Rand frowned.
You went a little fast there, Spar. You're the only ones who can kill Evans, because you're the only ones Evans will even fight at all,
Specchio explained.
Every 1,000 years, a hero named Ryu comes to save the world. That repetition of fate killed Evans' mother, a fully ascendant goddess in her own right. Your existence, all of you, is a challenge to Evans' delusions of inevitability, one he cannot ignore. His own insanity compels him to face you, should you confront him. But when you first learned of his existence, it was still several centuries before our time would come,
Sten said, scratching his chin.
So you had to stall. Got it again.
Specchio chuckled.
You're pretty sharp, kids. Before Evans' presence could grow to the point where he would be unstoppable, we came here, to this place where Miria's servants had fled after the first Dragon War. To infinity, the land beneath the land. For all Evans' power, there is one thing he will never be able to overcome, unless he succeeds in his mad ambitions and extinguishes all life on this planet save for his own. The spirit of this planet itself, of the world upon which we live, is abhorrent to him, as he is to her. He cannot pass through living earth. So you left Drojan and Skanda and came here instead,
Nina continued.
To hold him back, until the day came. We built a gate, to separate this world from the world above.
Specchio nodded.
And in order to fight his servants, we chose to live on this side of it. With the gate keeping his presence trapped here, Evans himself was stuck, but he still had the demons to do his dirty work for him. We've been fighting them for centuries, and it still wasn't enough. We suckered Evans by putting it all on you kids, but Habaruka got us right back by starting up the Church of Saint Eva as soon as we were gone. Without the Dragon Clan, worship of Loudon gave way to a new faith easily. And because of that, Evans is a lot stronger now than he was when you first came here,
Rand said slowly.
Tell it to us straight, old man. Do we have a chance? You do,
Specchio replied, smiling crookedly.
But there's a trick to it. You said your friend Ray helped you reach the last stage of the Breath of Fire, kid, but you were wrong. There's one more stage. One that only one light dragon in 1,000 years ever reaches. The fourth stage of the Breath of Fire, that brings with it the power to defeat even gods. Agni Anphani,
Ryu murmured, remembering what he had read in the history books.
Where the user and all of his friends become one with the spirit of Loudon himself. What, like fusion?
Cat made a face.
Except it's all of us, in one body. Perhaps,
Specchio said cryptically.
Then again, perhaps not. Like the third stage, the form which Agni Anphani takes is different each time, depending on the user. The strength of the Dragon Clan, of the Breath of Fire, of Loudon himself, and of all the world. It will be determined by whatever it is that your true strength is, Ryu Battison of Gate.
He stood up.
Tomorrow, you will return here and undergo a trial to discover just what that strength is, and give Agni Anphani shape and form, just as Evans himself prepares to take shape and form as well. Before then, however, one question remains. And that is?
Ryu asked coolly.
Traditionally, the hero is the only one who faces the trial,
Specchio explained.
This is a bit of a special case, though, so I'll give you the option of changing that up a bit. If you so desire, all of you will be tried, though separately. Or, you can trust in your leader, and leave the burden in his hands. Well, guys.
Ryu glanced at them.
Your call. We need to vote.
Bao asked dryly, and nodded when the others all shook their heads.
Didn't think so. Unanimous it is, then. We all go in. So it shall be, then.
Specchio nodded as well.
A house has been prepared for you, where you will find food. After coming down here, I'm sure you'll appreciate that. As long as you're here in Dologani, at least, you won't have to worry about a demon ambush. Catch up on your sleep. Trust me, you're gonna want to be on top of your game tomorrow. We always are,
Ryu told him, but a chill ran through him nonetheless. The house they were shown to was nice, if a bit empty. The furnishings were pleasant, but sparse, giving the impression that it had only been filled recently. Nobody asked about that, or about how there were exactly 9 bedrooms there. Even Spar, it seemed, didn't want to know. Nobody spoke much over dinner, either, and once they were done they all turned in, silently following Specchio's advice and preparing for whatever tomorrow would bring. Only once she was sure that everybody else was out did Dee slip out her window, with a quiet skill she had learned from 10 years at the Orion Magic School. Slithering down the streets, which were mostly empty at this time of night, she made her way back to the Temple of Loudon, where the man who called himself Specchio waited for her. This time, he was sitting on the temple's roof rather than its front steps, legs dangling in the air. Neither of them spoke at first, as she climbed up to join him. He gave her a nod in greeting, which she returned, before passing over a bottle of ale. Opening it with her thumb, she took a swig and smiled approvingly before letting most of her tail drop off the front of the temple. They sat there for some time, on either side of the carved dragon's head over the doors, looking over the town of Dologani as they drank and thought of the past.
It's nice,
Dee said eventually.
This place. Nicer than I thought it would be. I did my best to make sure it would be,
Specchio replied, smiling slightly.
Figured if we were going to live here from now on, there was no point in not doing the best we could. It's not bad, aside from all the demons. How often do they try something?
She asked, raising an eyebrow.
Most of the time, it's just a couple of punks testing to see if we're letting our guard down.
Specchio shrugged.
A real fight only crops up 3 or 4 times a year. We don't usually lose anybody.
After a moment, he scowled.
Unless, of course, one of ours goes over to their side. That happens every now and then, both from the light and the dark. That's sentient nature for you,
Dees told him.
It sucks, but there's no stopping it.
After a moment, she chuckled.
We saw enough of it back in your day to know that better than anybody, didn't we? Ryu, the writer. You know, I had almost forgotten that that's what they used to call me.
Specchio laughed as well.
Dem silly name, if you ask me, but I suppose it could be worse. At least it wasn't Castor. Ugh.
Dees put a hand to her forehead.
Where did that one even come from? I still can't believe you talked me into putting up with that for the PR value. I should have put a stop to it right then and there the first time. It was a little late, by that point,
Specchio reminded her.
We all had them. It was just the way it went.
He took another drink, eyes misting over.
Rider, caster, archer, lancer, berserker, assassin. And saber. She was the one who started the whole thing. That's right, she was, wasn't she?
Dee smiled again.
All right, I suppose I can forgive her for that one. How long did the two of you work together before she came up with it? About a month,
Specchio said, staring up at the darkness above Dologani.
That was how long it took her to convince me to go along with her plan. Right at first, I wasn't too impressed by some willful princess with a so-called master plan to end the Dragon War. Changed my mind after the Second Battle of Winlan.
He made a face.
Lawden, I can't believe that shithead managed to survive. Imagine how everybody felt about Yuna,
Dees told him, no trace of humor left in her voice.
At least they're both dead now. Them, and Manson too. Not to mention Aruhameral and Shapukai. These kids have been settling a lot of old debts. That they have,
Specchio admitted.
All that's left is Baruberry. Once he goes down, you and me are going to be the oldest mortals still alive on this world except for the wise trees. They die, eventually, as well,
Dees pointed out quietly.
I've seen it. Give it another 1,000 years, and you really will be second only to me. And I'm not sure I really count. You're still mortal,
Specchio assured her.
I'd know, if you weren't. I know.
Dees slowly nodded.
And believe me, I plan on staying that way. But considering where I came from...
She sighed.
You understand. You're probably the only one aside from Lawden who does. Not even Martin does, not really. But you. Being High Priest of Lawden for 2,000 years changes your perspective a little,
Specchio said, shaking his head slowly.
Yeah, I do.
He paused.
Baruberry might get it, too, but I don't think you're about to go out drinking and talking about the past with him, for some reason. Hell no.
Dee snorted.
I hate that guy. The sooner these kids do what we should have done back in your day, the better. I can't believe you and Martin actually set up that deal with him. It worked, didn't it?
Specchio pointed out.
And it went better than his turn did. Of course, circumstances were a little different, with him. That just might be the understatement of the millennium,
Dees replied dryly. They both fell silent again, then, finishing off their bottles and opening up a couple more, before she spoke once more.
So. What's going to go down tomorrow? In general terms. We'll take them into the temple,
Specchio explained.
Show them to the back room. And let the guys who'll be handling it from there do what they agreed to do. You're an exception, by the way. Hope you're not terribly disappointed. I was kind of wondering about that, actually,
Dees replied, smiling slightly.
Figured that'd be the case, but I didn't want to just ask. It would have been rude, you know. And you would never even dream of being rude,
Martin retorted, and they both laughed.
The fact that I doubt you're going to be changing your ways, even a little, after all this time aside. We had to stretch things just to come up with 8. Don't know where we'd have been able to get a 9th. Stretch things.
Dees frowned.
Just who the hell are these?
She trailed off then, eyes slowly widening, as she turned her head to stare down at the temple behind and below them.
You're kidding. You brought them back. Not for long,
Specchio told her.
They're dead, and there's no real coming back from that. But inside that temple, in the rooms we've set up. Well, you can get away with a bit more than you can in the rest of the world. We called them up, and asked if they'd be willing to do us a favor, and they agreed. I was kind of surprised that they did, to be honest. Speaking honestly, myself, I'm not really sure how I feel about that,
Dees admitted, frowning.
Disturbing their rest like that, I mean. But I suppose I can see the logic involved. I can't say I can think of anybody better for this than them. I'm just wondering who the eighth.
She paused, then snapped her fingers.
Oh. Of course. Fortune, right. Yeah, we're lucky he's the kind who learns a little differently from the rest.
Specchio nodded.
You see the problem with finding one for you, even if we wanted to, though. And would that be so bad, sister? To see me again? Would you really hate that so much? Yeah.
Dee slowly nodded.
Yeah, I guess you've got me there. Something wrong?
The old man asked, frowning.
For a second there, I almost thought.
He left it hanging.
Forget it,
she told him.
It's nothing. Just old memories. Memories, and regrets. You know what it's like. Yeah.
Specchio agreed quietly.
Yeah, I do.
He took another drink before continuing.
2000 goddamn years. 2000 goddamn years,
Dees, who had once been called the caster, repeated, just as quietly.
Archer. Lancer. Berserker. Assassin. And Saber. And Saber,
Ryu, the writer, echoed as they sat on the roof of the temple of her father, in the city beneath the world, sharing an understanding that was more than words could ever convey. Do the impossible see the invisible.